Welcome back to another podcast. Today I have David and Roman again, and we're going to be talking about motivation and about biblical concepts that apply to business. So, guys, welcome.
Two things that I know nothing about.
I agree with that. I don't know what insights I can provide.
So great disclaimers up front.
We're just letting you know we're not the guys to listen to for either of these, motivation or Christian business. No, I'm just joking.
But yeah, and I'm jumping right into it unless you guys want to talk about it.
No, ease into it, Jerry. Ease into it. Go nice and slow. No, do what you got to do, man.
Okay, so when it comes to motivation, there's a few things going on, right? There's like intrinsic motivation, there's extrinsic motivation. So in your opinion, in your expert opinion of yourself, what motivates you?
Well, I mean, if it's okay with you, I'd like to first get an idea. I mean, I think I can sort of surmise what you mean by intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, but maybe you can help me out a little bit with that first.
Sure. So, I mean, intrinsic motivation is motivation that motivates a person from the inside. Basically, the person is self-motivated. Is one simplistic way of looking at it. And then extrinsic motivation is something that motivates a person by something on the outside. Either somebody else is motivating them through positive or negative reinforcement, or it's something like that the person, I don't know, wants some kind of reward by doing something versus not looking for that reward, but just doing it because they want to do it.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. So what's your question was what motivates me? What motivates us? Is that
yes? Like specifically, you guys, what motivates you?
Typically, I don't ask myself those questions, but it doesn't mean I never ask them. Occasionally, I do. But one thing I found out a few years, probably like 15 years ago, I read a book by John Maxwell. Don't even remember which book it was, but he was talking about how to get yourself motivated specifically, and he gave like 7 to 10 points. I don't remember most of them, but one that did stand out, and I've been applying it and using it in my life ever since. He said that if the path before you is clear, that will motivate you. So like if you don't know what you're doing or what you should be doing, or the path is not clear, it's not visible, you don't know where you're heading, like it's vague, it's blurry, then you're not going to be motivated, right? So if you bring clarity to your path before you, it's going to get you excited and motivated. And he was talking about it in the context of leadership, that when you lead people and your people are not motivated, one of the things you can do is create a clear vision. And when you create a clear vision, your followers see what they need to be doing, right? And that motivates them. So if they're not motivated, maybe they don't know what they're doing. And you can apply that to followers, you can apply it to yourself.
Mm-hmm. So, but in terms of yourself, like what do you feel motivates you today?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely one of the first things. I mean, if I have to think and talk about motivation specifically, I think that that's the only thing that comes to my mind. Often catch myself that like, hey, I don't have any motivation to do what I should be doing. Why? Why am I procrastinating? Why am I putting this off? Well, because it's not clear what I should be doing. So I should spend some time planning and clarifying the path in front of me, the vision, the goal. And once that's clear, oh yeah, motivation definitely comes.
And I want to point out, I think it's funny because you started off by saying, I don't really think about these things, but it sounds like you think about these things a lot.
Well, this one thing, yeah.
No, and just to kind of to add on to that, and I thought that was really good, man. I appreciate that. One thing I would add on to that, and it's sort of along the same lines, is really, and you've heard it before, probably said that, knowing your why, knowing exactly what your why is, and defining what that why is. If you have a clear definition of what that why is, why am I, doing these things? Why have I made the decision to, to get up in the morning and to provide? I often make this joke that my family, they have this nagging habit. It's called eating. So we kind of have to, get up in the morning and provide for our families. And you actually convicted me with the word not too long ago, and I forget the verse, but you had mentioned the verse that talked about, what was it about the man that is cursed, that if he's not providing for his family, you had kind of referenced it. Do you remember that verse? Or?
I don't remember the conversation that you're referring to, but I know the verse you're talking about.
Yeah. And I'd like to look it up actually for the viewers, for the benefit of the viewers, what that verse is. But yeah, I mean that the word is clear on that, that if you're not providing for your family, that there is some perils involved with that, right? But all that to say that is sort of like a negative reinforcement, I guess, to a certain degree, but the positive reinforcement, I know personally that if I know that if I get up in the day and I have a clear vision of what I need to accomplish for the day and I get that done, that feeling afterward is far greater than not having a clear vision of what I want to get done for the day, and then just sort of like winging it, if you will, so there's, I think there's more strategic sort of like whys, and there's more tactical day-to-day kind of whys, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely. So, let's take one and the other kind of apart and see if we can dig deeper there.
I feel like he's got something planned for us. Don't you feel that? Like he's trapping us here. I feel like he's walking us into a buzzsaw.
Look at all those pages.
I know, seriously. He's ready to go.
Okay, so I went to that conference, whatever it was, a month ago or so.
You went to two of them. So which one are you talking about?
The one in Florida.
Okay.
And I went there before, so that was the Vault. And Patrick, he talks about, when it comes to motivation, he talks about 4 areas. Or
for the viewers,
items.
Patrick Bet David.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So he talks about the 4 groups of motivation. One he calls achievement. The other one status, another one individuality, and the fourth one purpose. And so achievement is more like people who are, let's say, in corporate environment, and they want to like achieve something in terms of like go to the next level of management or whatever that may be. They're driven by completing tasks, checking off tasks, getting those done, or getting those promotions like I just mentioned. That's just like 2 examples. There's a little bit more to it, but basically achieving something motivates them. Another group of motivations is status. So status is or lifestyle, let's say. Status. So status is having a nice car, having a nice house, having stuff basically, and being like valued or respected by others, being popular or that kind of a thing. So that would be a group of like status motivation. Then another one, individuality. Individuality is just doing kind of your own thing, having a certain lifestyle where you have like freedom to do whatever you want to do, that kind of a thing. And then the fourth one is purpose, having some kind of where you have a sense of purpose that you're meant to do something and you're doing that thing. But as I was kind of trying to go through each one of these and trying to figure out for myself, like, where do I fit in? There's like I mentioned, there's like sub items under each one of these 4. And I would pick like one out of this one out of that one out of the other one. So to me, it was not really clear, like, what exactly motivates me in that sense. So I've been kind of looking and thinking through that a lot and feeling like none of them motivate me. And then I don't know, I thought through this like a sense of duty, like looking in the Bible, and the Bible talks about what we should be doing. Kind of the verse that you just mentioned, if the person doesn't provide for their family, they're worse than an unbeliever. So it's not like that motivation is not achievement, it's not status, it's not purpose, it's not individuality. It's like it's a sense of duty, or it's like this is what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe it's close to purpose if for those people who are like clearly understand what their purpose is. But if you go through life and you're like, okay, I've done this, I've done that, but I'm not sure if that was my purpose or this was my purpose or what is my purpose, kind of a thing. So I guess I've added that fifth one, like a sense of duty, and I wanted to kind of discuss it with you guys and kind of maybe get a little bit deeper in terms of what do you think of these four, just kind of from a quick overview of what I mentioned, and then what do you think of the fifth one?
Yeah, I mean, I can kick it off if you want, but
Go for it.
Go for it.
You know, I don't know that I necessarily would agree with all four of those, like, you know, confining it to those four. I would agree with those categories, but there might, you know, be some in addition to that. But with regard to what you had mentioned, the fifth category that you added was duty. And I do think that intertwines directly with purpose. Only because I think it, like, a duty to who? What is your who are you responsible to? You're responsible to yourself. You're responsible to your family. Who are you responsible to? And ultimately, if there's no sort of divine implication, like, for example, for the atheist, I don't know if they have that sense of duty. Who would it be to? I don't know.
Right. I mean, in their case, there probably is no such thing as far as duty, you know, sense of duty.
Yeah, I mean, they would probably argue that, but I understand what you're saying. But I guess my point, though, is that fifth category of duty that you sort of you know, kind of shoehorned in there, I think it does. I think it correlates directly with purpose, and I would tie that to the divine, and, you know, like a divine sort of implication there, that you have a duty to your Creator. And I think that is all part of purpose. I don't think that those are I don't think that they're mutually exclusive.
I guess what I was thinking also is, like, purpose, usually I associated it with something unique for yourself. Like you were meant to do X, and X is something unique. I don't know, like, some people are meant to be pastors, other people are meant to be artists or whatever else. It's like something unique and specific, versus other people kind of like meander in life and try to figure out, they tried this and they're not sure if that's the thing. They're okay at it, but maybe not the best at it. Then they try another thing, they're okay. Like anything they set their mind to, they can do, but they don't feel necessarily that that's their purpose. Versus like the other, like if purpose is a coin, the other side of the coin is that sense of duty. It's like, well, you have to provide for your family. You have to, like, certain things you just have to do. It's not unique to you or me. It's the same for everybody. Like, we all need to provide, right? Like, it's not, I have to provide and that's my purpose, but you don't have to. It's not your purpose. So, like, there's like the general and then there's the specific. Right. So when I was thinking of purpose, I was thinking more on the specific side.
I guess what would you say to then the single man who does not have a, you know, wife or kids, and it's just, you know, him by himself? Who is his duty to?
Well, so if we expand the duty portion of it, like, it's not just providing for your family. It's more to it than that. If we're Christians, there's a lot of things that we should be doing. It's not just providing for the family. So the sense of duty, there would be more to it.
Can you give me an example of one?
I mean, a general thing would be to be Christ-like, and how did Christ, you know, who was he like? Like, how did he treat people? What did he do? How did he contribute to the world? Things like that.
And you're suggesting, so that's like a general duty that all believers should have, versus I was called to be a pastor, or I was called to be.
Yes. So
when you say a duty, and if that duty is that you're called to be a pastor, again, and maybe you know, you could talk, but I don't see a difference in you know, I can't separate that from purpose, you know. So, and I think we're arguing over semantics here, but
it may all be under purpose and it's fine, but like in that case, let's split purpose into two categories.
Okay.
So category one, generic,
sure,
or like overall general, and then specific. Yeah.
Got it.
So then I'm talking about more specific, like what is our specific purpose?
So you'd like to know, Roman, what do you feel like your specific purpose is? David, what is your specific purpose?
So we're talking about more motivation, like what motivates you, and purpose doesn't have to be the thing that motivates you. Like, there's nothing wrong with those other things.
Yeah, I was gonna say, people. Like, I'm trying to connect the dots with the motivational topic. But I guess you were, so the question is, or the question was that you asked is, how do we look at those four areas?
Well, first is more like what motivates you, and let's look at it from a perspective, like a bigger perspective. Not what motivates you to do 3 tasks today, but what motivates you to do the job that you're doing or live the life that you're living from like a bigger picture perspective.
Yeah. So like if we really zoom out and start from the beginning, or from the high 10,000 bird view position, I mean, you have your hedonists, right? People who pursue pleasure. That's the main point in life, and that's what drives people. And a lot of us are like in some way, like it can be confusing. People say we are Christians, but in reality, they pursue maximum pleasure in their life, right? Even helping others becomes kind of this feel good motivation. Like, oh, I helped others, it makes me feel good. It's like almost like a drug. So you're not helping people because Christ told you to help people. You're not helping people out of love. Or maybe there is some of that, but it's very important to find out that you're not doing it just to make yourself feel good, and that's what you're pursuing ultimately, right? So that's one popular motivation in Western culture, right? Hedonism. And I think it's one of the biggest enemies right now in Christianity. It's enemies of selflessness and altruism. It's an enemy of taking up your cross and following Jesus and saying no to yourself, but saying yes to his purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the biggest. But what's the right motivation? What's the right purpose to have in your life? And that is, I mean, that is following Christ. I look at like Apostle Paul, what drove him, what drove the first apostles, the initial group of people that spread Christianity, and the first followers of Jesus. Like, what was driving them? And you most of the time you hear like, well, they saw Christ rise from the dead, like they were hanging out with him, he died, they saw him die, horrible death, they saw him being buried, his family saw the same thing, and then suddenly he starts appearing to people alive, right? And that just, like, people who were afraid, who were scattered, who were hiding, didn't want to do anything, suddenly become this different group of people who are highly energized, highly driven. And why? Like, majority of theologians, preachers, and Christians will say because they saw Jesus alive after he clearly died, and he fulfilled all the promises that he had made earlier. But others will also add that they were baptized in the Holy Spirit and they were empowered, because Jesus did say that do not go anywhere, wait for the Holy Spirit, and when the Holy Spirit will come upon you, you will receive power to become my witnesses. And, different theologians will interpret it differently, but ultimately it's the resurrection power and the power of the Holy Spirit that drove them. And obviously I try to apply that to my life. Like, how can I be driven like Paul was driven? How can I be driven like Apostle Peter was driven? And it's a great puzzle. Like, how do you make that work for you? Like, it obviously worked for them, and I want it to work for me, but how do I make it relevant in this age and this culture in my life personally? And it's a challenge, everyday challenge. And one of the first things you need to do is to understand how the biblical worldview works, right? What exactly it means that Christ rose from the dead. Like you have to study the Bible to understand that, to be a real Christian. Like, you intellectually have to understand it. Yeah, I mean, I'm going into rabbit trails here.
Yeah, no, you reminded me of our past conversations where you mentioned that, I don't know if you call it a goal or what you want to call it, is to live, like serve God, and then die and be forgotten. And you can
Oh yeah.
like rephrase it the way that you mentioned it, because I'm kind of butchering it a little bit.
Preach the gospel, die and be forgotten. One of my favorite quotes of all time by
Yeah.
Count Zinzendorf.
So like in that sense, it's like, what is the motivation? Like, because part of purpose is legacy also underneath there. It's like, oh, I want to leave a legacy, you know, that was here on earth or whatever it is, right? But in that quote, there is no leaving a legacy, at least not with your name signed behind it, right? There might be a legacy, but nobody knows like who was this person or whatever, if you're you know, dead and forgotten.
Yeah. And that's good. Thank you for bringing it up. If hedonism is one of the enemies, like I like to create this contrast because they help us understand things, right? Like when you're trying to understand the right motivation, it's really good to look at the bad motivations. And hedonism is one of the top ones in today's culture. Well, I think it's always been around. But another one is this pursuit of legacy and being remembered, and just putting your name on things that are being done, great things, you know, and just like I want everybody to know. And so when you look at that quote, preach the gospel, die and be forgotten, most Christian leaders and just Christian ministers will have no problem with preaching the gospel. They'll preach the gospel, they'll preach the truth, and they will go into places and even are willing to die. Like a lot of Christians, good Christians, are willing to die for the gospel, for preaching and spreading the truth. But majority, no, I shouldn't say majority, a lot of Christians do not think about this aspect of leaving a legacy, being remembered, right? And they're driven by it, and this is so sneaky. This is like it's a very hidden agenda that like even the self is not aware of it. It's like subconscious. You have this drive to be remembered, and I'm surprised how many ministers put their own name, like first name and last name, on their ministry. Maybe there's some legal reasons behind it as well, but like I know quite a few people I interacted with that I know for a fact that why they leave their name on, you know, put their name on their ministry. It's about being remembered. It's about having a legacy, and maybe there is a little bit of a room for it, but when it becomes main driver or almost a main driver, that's crazy. And I think it's like it's a problem in today's culture in the West, especially in United States. United States probably the most individualistic country in the world, where it's all about the individual, and people are driven by trying to stand out, by trying to be remembered, by trying to be honored and recognized and praised. Like that's how this culture works here. Collectivistic cultures are not like that. Individuals are not encouraged to stand out. They are encouraged to blend in. Sorry, I don't want to hijack this.
Sounds like a plug for communism. I don't know if you're going in that direction.
Plug for communism, you have to expand
it. It was a joke, man. It was a bad joke. Jerry got it.
No, like you're talking about collectivism, and communism is more collectivistic.
Well,
than
I'm not describing an economic system. I'm talking about cultural aspects, right?
Yeah, I mean that's why David.
Some families are more collectivistic, and so yeah, if you start applying collectivism to economical system, then yeah, but that's a whole different discussion.
Well, I mean that's a whole socio-economic sort of,
yeah, that's outside of my scope of understanding.
Yeah. But David, so what are your thoughts on that? So you have this various parts that motivate people, right? From achievement, status, purpose, individuality, and so on. Like we can use all kinds of words for them. As Christians, is there room for those things to motivate us, or are we supposed to just be motivated by God directly or indirectly, or however? Like what? If you can kind of maybe dive into it a little bit and give your thoughts on that.
So I don't know that I when I open Scripture and I look at the Word, if I see any evidence that tells us that we're called to create a legacy, or we're called to have some sort of, remembrance of something that we did. In fact, I see the opposite, particularly like we cast out demons in your name, we prophesied in your name, get away from me, I never knew you, So, so when I would tend to agree with that quote, and that's the first time I ever heard it. I like that quote that you mentioned. So, I think that when we look at the process of, justification, sanctification, and glorification while we're here, the process of sanctification, we're called to look every day more and more like Jesus. That's really, the call. John the Baptist says, we want you, let me decrease so that you can increase, right? And there's all sorts of accolades and titles given to John the Baptist, however, at the same time, we see the reverse of that. So I guess to answer your question, is there any room for us to say, hey, look what I did, look what I created, look what I was able to accomplish on this earth? I don't see that I don't see that anywhere in Scripture. I can't find that. So is that something that I do a good job of practicing? Probably not. So I guess that there is possibly that internal struggle, at times of, well, God, you created me for a purpose. I want to fulfill that purpose. But if I'm at my best, it's when I'm getting out of the way and God is working through me and he's accomplishing what he wants to accomplish through me, not David trying to accomplish what I think is my purpose or my legacy.
So, that just kind of makes me think of two kind of contradicting things. One, and we had these discussions before, kind of like the free will versus not, right? Like, how much is it that God wants us to think through things and do things versus just telling us to do something and us being more robotic or just kind of, okay, God said this, you did this, okay, and on to the next task type of thing, versus, okay, God gave you an area to figure out and go ahead and figure out the best way to handle this area.
I'm not 100% sure I understand the question.
Maybe to paraphrase it, is how much is it God telling us directly or specifically what needs to be done versus God wanting us to use our minds to figure out how to do something?
So when you say, and I'm sorry, unless you wanted to answer that.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, but so when you say God telling us, hey, David, I want you to move from from Florida to North Carolina, right? Versus, I want you to be in my word and I want you to follow what my word says. Is that what you're asking?
Well, one is kind of self-evident, right? Like, why would God not want us to read the Bible? Like, that's
no,
like a given.
Yeah.
But let's take the one moving from up north to south. Like,
yeah.
God telling you to do it versus based on your life situations, you're like, okay, I think for our family, it's better if we move.
Yeah. So I can only speak to my specific situation here. And it's funny because I had recently had a conversation with an elder at a church about this. And, this is kind of getting into not just, what you were discussing in sort of a free will argument, but talking more about like a cessationist sort of discussion of whether or not God is, the gifts of that we see in the Bible for the disciples are they gifts for today? Can we hear from the Lord? Can we hear the voice of the Lord? Can we respond to the voice of the Lord? And how do you know it's the voice of the Lord when you're hearing it, right? Is it David that's just saying, man, this is a good idea, Lord, I really would like to do this, so it'd be really cool if you could just kind of give me direction, and that direction would be to do that, So I think that becomes a little tricky. I think that it all comes back to being in communion with God and how much time you're spending with God and how much you're in communion with Him. And I know that for me anyway, the more time that I'm spending spending with the Lord, fasting and praying and in those instances, I get a better opportunity to hear the voice of the Lord. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people that tell you that they heard from the voice of the Lord, and it's not my place to question it, but I would gather or venture I guess an estimate that probably happens very infrequently. When people say that I heard the Lord told me to do this, when it really is just something that they kind of conjured up on their own. So to say that, to kind of get a roundabout way to get back to your question, I think it's important that if we're in communion with the Lord, if we're fasting, if we're praying, if we're setting our hearts and our desires, and if you abide in me and my word abides in you, then you will ask for what you desire and it will be given to you. If we're in connection with the Holy Spirit, then we're going to be doing the things that he wants us to do anyway. And I think that we'll know those things, because we'll be in, communion with him, and we are in communion with him. Does that answer the question, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's
getting close.
I mean, I don't have the answers, right?
I just I understand. I guess what I'm saying is, I almost forget in a way the original question. And
it makes sense. Like, I feel like the answer is nuanced. Like, it's not one or the other, and it's not overwhelming this one versus that one, in terms of like God directly telling us to do something versus God wanting us to use our mind. I think it's both. It's not necessarily one or the other kind of a thing.
Oh, I see. I understand. Yeah. I got you. So the sort of the humanistic aspect of it, are we, does God want us to really kind of think for ourselves? And so I'll give you one example, then I'll let Roman speak. So when we decided to move from one town in Florida to another town in Florida, I had a clear, like a vision, a dream of the house that we moved into 2 years before we actually knew that this house even existed. And then by the time we moved into this house, it was the exact house that I had in my dream, 100%. So at that point, it was sort of like clear, because there was a lot of other things that happened, that the Lord was sort of opening doors for us to move into this house, right? You can call me crazy or whatever, but I will argue to the end, because it was divinely orchestrated, and the providence of God was on my family's, my family, throughout the whole process. However, and there's a reason why I'm telling you this, when we made the decision to move from that town in Florida to Charlotte, a couple of my friends were moving to Charlotte at the time, and I didn't know if we were supposed to move to Charlotte, and I was praying, God, please give me direction. Are we called to move to Charlotte or not? And then I felt like the Lord said very clearly, after fasting and praying about this, the Lord said, you honored what I had asked you to move to this other town. Now I want you to make the decision, and wherever you go, I'm going to honor it. The great thing about it is, I think that there's so much grace that God has, that even if we, in our minds, humanistically, make a left when a zig when we're supposed to zag, I think God still has, grace and will, I think he will honor, that, to a certain degree, because if we're in communion with him and we're abiding in his word and we're residing in him, I think that there's a tremendous amount of grace for that.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
I just compromised a lot of time there, so it's on you.
Yeah, you have to elaborate on the question again.
So the question was, does God want to just give you direction versus want you to figure out that direction using your mind that he's given you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is both. It's always both, but I was thinking about marketplace, like working in a business, in a company, and you hire an employee, and at first you micromanage them. You tell them, hold this, do this, follow these directions. But then as employee becomes more experienced and knowledgeable and professional, you delegate bigger tasks, and eventually they just need to know the mission and the project that they're working on. But all the details, they're free to figure out themselves, right? So, I mean, it's not every analogy fails, and this one probably fails very quickly, but at the face value, it kind of works, right? Like, I remember when I was younger, God was directing me a lot, like on a daily basis, like, hey, go say this, go do this. I'm exaggerating, but basically, right? But now I'm in my mid-40s, and for the last few years, actually, you're thinking more about bigger purposes, like, okay, what's the ultimate goal, ultimate purpose. And one of the things, as you guys were talking, you mentioned that quote by Count Zinzendorf, preach the gospel, die and be forgotten. But another, that was very motivational in my life. But another motivation in my life has been something that reformers came up with, the 5 solas, like sola scriptura, scripture alone, sola fide, faith alone, solus Christus, Christ alone, and so on. And one of the latest things they formulated was soli Deo gloria, for God's glory alone, right? So, which basically means that our lives are primarily designed, created, and need to be lived for God's glory ultimately. Not for your own purposes, not for your own ideas, not for the greatest good, not for the maximum pleasure, not for leaving a legacy, for God's glory. So it's all about you being forgotten, or like you said, John the Baptizer said that I should become less and he should become more, right? And that what it means to do this soli Deo gloria, for God's glory alone. Like it should be less and less about me, and I have to smoke out, or is it proper to say smoke out or weed out? Find out all these little weeds you have on the inside, in the subconscious, that actually redirect you, and you're doing things for yourself, for your own legacy, in memory of yourself, instead of doing it for the God's glory. Because God ultimately, why did he create everything? Right? That's a good thing to do. And I think in one of the small groups we talked about this. Why did God create everything? He didn't create it because he was lonely. A lot of people do this bad theology and say, like, well, God was lonely and he wanted to have community, so God was fine. He had community. He was and is sufficient. So why did he create us? So ultimately, and that's why this is a very profound statement, for God's glory alone. That's why reformers came up with it, because it's very profound. Everything, like God created everything for his glory, and that's why we live. That's why I live. Everything else is secondary. Yeah, God gives me freedom to move around and pursue other secondary things, but ultimately I live to glorify him. So I need to have a mindset, I need to have my eyes set on glorifying and praising God, because that was my ultimate purpose. So car was created to drive, chair was created to be sat in, and I was created to glorify and praise God.
Yeah. Well said.
If I could drop the mic, I would drop it for him.
I'll just take a sip.
There you go.
All right. Any other thoughts on motivation?
Any other thoughts? Oh yeah, well, just real quick. I was listening to a podcast with Tucker Carlson and Dan Bongino, and Dan Bongino was talking about how God created us with a very unique sort of reward system, an internal reward system. And he talked about how his motivation is that he gets to go on date night with his wife on Friday nights. That's his reward. So he talks about, how all throughout the week he does things that suck. And he talks about, how, he gets up early to prep for, one show, and, he's, working on, other projects at the same time, and all these things, they all suck. And the reason why I'm saying it is because the whole point was that, when we do things that are hard, we do things that are not easy, we get to have this sort of, this flow of whatever you want to call it, serotonin, and just rush of, sort of like a reward, because we did these things, that were hard, that, in I guess in biblical times, men went out into the field and they, plowed the fields and they worked hard, And I think that in culture today, we see sort of a softening of that, where people are heading towards pleasure first. And as you head towards pleasure first, you realize that there's a much shorter fall, I guess, versus if you were to kind of run and seek after the things that were difficult. One of the examples that he gives is, how he does he's one of these crazy people that does like the ice water plunge, whatever, in the morning, and it sucks. But, the way that the body is designed, the way God designed our bodies is to have, just this sort of this reverse sort, rush of enjoyment after we've done all of these things that were hard. So for motivation, his whole point was go towards the things that suck. Find out the things that are hard to do. Do those hard things. Don't try to just look for the things that are easy to do.
Yeah, it's like working out. You work out, like for me, I don't really like working out, but after I'm done working out, then I'm like, I feel good that I did it and it's over, but feel better.
Yeah, that reminds me of a book I read. Can't remember which book and which author, but it talks about being properly challenged. Like when you're doing a task or doing some kind of work or you're on a mission, you want to be challenged, because if you're not challenged, you're not motivated. Like if it's too easy, right? But if you're overly challenged, like the challenge is too big, then you're in danger of burning out because it's too much to handle. And then if you're in the middle, you're kind of not moving anywhere. So the author said that you have to find that middle and go slightly above it.
Mm-hmm.
So find something that's, not too difficult and not too easy, but just a little difficult. And I remember, it was good to read. I don't know if I ever applied it, but in my mind, it was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So moving on to another topic, biblical concepts that apply to business. So first one I have here is stewardship. So just in general, stewardship. So being entrusted with something to make sure to take care of it, like to take care of its well-being, whether it's a person or whether it's an asset, like a business or whatever it is, livestock or whatever it is. Like, how do you guys see that translating into business?
Well, that's connected to what we have been talking about. For example, when I think about stewardship, right, obviously stewardship is in the Bible, but like anything else, it can go off the rails quickly. I always try to apply this hermeneutic to studying the Bible. And one of the greatest one that I have heard and always apply is be careful and make sure that you don't shout where the Bible is whispering, and you don't whisper where the Bible is shouting. Like you have to have proportional understanding. Some concepts like love, for example, or faith, Bible shouts about, like that's huge, that's big. Grace, mercy, right? Forgiveness, repentance, and then other things Bible might be very silent, not silent, but whispers about, but we can blow it out and build a doctrine about it, out of it, right? And claim that, hey, this is straight from the Bible. Well, it's from the Bible, but you're shouting where the Bible is whispering, right? So you have to have this proportional response. So Bible does talk about stewardship. How much does it talk about stewardship? That's a different subject, right? But we have to be careful about it because stewardship can be taken out of the proportion. But when I think about stewardship, for example, managing your gifts and talents, right? People will often say, like, I want to become the best version of myself in the name of stewardship. And stewardship is a biblical concept. And yeah, logically, it makes sense, right? Like, okay, logically, Bible tells me to practice stewardship. God gave me these gifts. I want to become a best version of myself. But in this case, stewardship kind of becomes an idol or ultimate goal, where in fact, glorifying God is the ultimate goal. And sometimes glorifying God requires you to say no to certain talents that you have and certain potential that can be unlocked. Because by unlocking potential, maybe you're looking to glorify yourself. And maybe that needs to die in you. Because Christ calls us to take up the cross, say no to yourself, and basically die to yourself. And very often, God sends people into desert in their life for several years where this part of the person dies. And then the person is ready to have his potential unlocked. But this time it's in a healthy context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of going back to motivation, right? Like if the motivation is self versus God, then you go to the desert.
Yeah, I'm just showing how stewardship can be can take you off rails, basically.
But maybe this is a different concept. Maybe it's related to this, or at least the example of the stewardship that you mentioned, like being the best version of yourself. It does talk in the Bible to do things or to work as unto the Lord, not as unto whoever your employer is or whoever you're working for, right? So in that sense, improving yourself to be the best version of yourself, as long as you have the motivation that you're doing it as unto the Lord, I think it should be okay.
Yeah. Did you have something to say? No. Okay. So I look, we're talking about how I should live. We're talking about ethics, right? About proper behavior for a Christian person. And I typically go to 10 Commandments, because 10 Commandments, they basically summarize the entire, set of directions for a Christian life. And one of the things, one of the commandments, the most known commandments, is thou shalt not steal, right? Take somebody else's stuff, basically. And what that means is we have to value property. Like property belongs to somebody else or it belongs to you. So we have to value that fact, right? And this commandment is very short, thou shalt not steal, but it points to different passages that refer to protecting property or cultivating property. Like you should not be lazy. I mean, we have an entire book in the Bible that talks about fools being lazy, right? Like because they relax, they take somebody else's stuff or rely on somebody else instead of working hard to maintain property or protect somebody else's property. So it talks about laziness. Bible talks about hard work. I think it's all connected to that commandment, thou shalt not steal, which summarizes a bigger concept. Yeah, I kind of forgot where I was going with it. What was the initial question?
Improving yourself. Like, as long as you have the right motivation, then improving yourself would be something that you do as unto the Lord. Like, you're not improving it just for yourself. You're improving it so that you can be a good steward.
I guess I was thinking more of a business principles and hard work. It's not something that works as motivation in itself, right? It's not the ultimate goal, but it is a biblical principle. Stewardship and hard work and protecting property, like not just your own property that you have cultivated and saved up and worked hard for, but respecting and honoring and protecting somebody else's property, respecting the laws that are created to protect somebody else's property. Those are biblical principles. So I guess I was thinking in those terms.
Yeah. David, what do you think?
About what?
About stewardship and how it applies to business.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to like to do these podcasts with Roman next to me because I think I don't know, either by default makes me seem smarter or less smart, one of the two, just because you're here. But I would agree with everything that Roman said. Because I think we have a responsibility, to steward the things that God gives. So I mean, like, look, here's the reality, and we sort of had a funny conversation about being American, how there were some folks that had an accent, and I had asked them where they were from, and they kind of got upset with me for asking. Well, we're from America, and when you look at just the sheer sort of like, and I talk to my kids about this all the time. When you look at the sheer probability that we were born in this country, I was born in this country. You guys have the opportunity, to be American. We all have the opportunity to be Americans. Like the probability of that is like very, very slim. Very, very slim. The reality is, just from pure probability, if you're a human being on this planet, you're going to live in a poor area. You're not gonna have, some of the luxuries that we have. You're not gonna have the ability to even sit down and give a podcast in a beautiful studio like this. So to that degree, much has been given, and there is sort of, I think, a higher expectation to steward that in a higher regard, than there might be for others. So when it comes to business in particular, I think that it's very easy to lose sight of that ideal, to do things as if you're doing them unto the Lord. It's very, very easy to, in my opinion anyway, to lose that quickly. I think that's something that I personally have to stay centered and focused on, and remind myself on a consistent basis, look at how much the Lord has given to you in order to steward. Am I doing a good job of stewarding that? And I think that's a good thing to constantly check and ask yourself.
Yeah. And we mentioned, or Roman, you mentioned work ethic as part of like the stewardship, and work ethic is actually another concept coming from the Bible that can be applied to work, to business. So 2 verses that talk about that. Proverbs 14:23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. And that's in NIV. And then the one that we've been mentioning a few times, Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. So work ethic, the Bible definitely talks about it. And as business owners, as people in business, we want to have others that are in the company that are working hard, not just kind of taking it easy, especially like from a business owner perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, with regard to a work ethic, that there is a lot of nature versus nurture, that occurs with that. Like, you see folks that I sometimes look at and I admire that are like, I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and I get 90% of my stuff done by 7:30 a.m. and this way I'm 3 days ahead of everybody else, that kind of thing. And I sort of admire that. Usually you'll find that those folks have some sort of, I guess, background, either familial background or possibly even, I guess, military background, some sort of background that gave them that, or that embedded that ethic in them. I don't know that ethic is necessarily something that is just for the Christian faith. Like meaning that I don't know that just because you're necessarily a hard believer or hard worker that you are you can tie that back specifically to Christianity. I think there's plenty of hard workers in other faiths and other belief systems that are hard workers. So I don't know that those two are necessarily required to be together. But I guess to answer your question, hard work, being a hard worker, having that hard work ethic, it's number one, it's rather subjective. I mean, what one person might think is a hard work, another person might not. But I think, we all kind of understand what we mean by that if the task at hand is being sought after and we're going after that.
Well, I mean, so just to expand a little bit more on that, there's another, I don't know if it's Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, probably Proverbs, that talks about basically a lazy person will be like, will have excuses like, oh, there's a lion in the street, so I can't go out and do anything. Oh, this is happening, so I can't do this. Like they come up with excuses for why they can't do something, versus a person who has good work ethic or is a hard worker will just do things even though it's hard. Like what you mentioned earlier about going after the hard thing and just doing that hard thing, and then you get that reward afterwards, or you'll feel better or feel good afterwards. Versus, yeah, go ahead.
You were talking about the lazy people finding excuses. I saw a meme the other day where somebody says like, hey, let's start a support group for the procrastinators. And another person says, yeah, but let's do it tomorrow.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, was there a question there?
No.
Okay. All right. I
just
just want to make sure I'm at least trying to handle all your questions,
yeah.
But yeah.
So work ethic was another one.
I mean, that's one of the things Bible shouts about, I would say, laziness. Not necessarily hard work, but laziness, right? Like the whole book is almost the entire book of Proverbs is dedicated to talking about fools and lazy people. So definitely Bible is calling us to step up our game and not just lay around relaxing and do nothing, but actually be productive, create things, right? It calls us to be workers, maybe not hard workers, but workers for sure.
Yeah.
But we obviously have to take into account, like David said, it's very subjective. Like, for example, I'm very project oriented. Like I plan ahead in my mind all the things that I want to accomplish, and I find the most efficient and quick way to accomplish them, so that then once it's all accomplished, I don't have to do anything. Like, it's my free time. I can relax. I can do things that I enjoy. But somebody is like my wife. She's not project oriented like me. Like, if she finishes things early and she has extra time, she'll find other things to do. Like, she just cannot sit still. So like, we're wired completely different. But just because I finish my things quickly doesn't mean I'm lazy. Some people probably think that that's being lazy, but that's creative. That's hard work of my mind, I guess, of planning things in such a way that I can maximize my free time. Yeah, so it is kind of subjective.
Right. Yeah. And I'm thinking, yeah, we can define it different ways, I guess. But I guess maybe I'm just looking at more extreme cases, like people who totally just don't want to do anything, or you have to like micromanage them or tell them, okay, do this, and then they finish that, okay, now go do this.
Yeah.
Now go do this, and it gets annoying, gets whatever. Like come on, you can think for yourself a little bit. Like, here's generally what you need to do, and go get it done. Versus somebody who, like you mentioned, like your wife or other people who are like just nonstop. They just can't sit still at all. So yeah, I don't draw a distinction saying, okay, this is a hard worker or has great work ethic, and this person doesn't. Like, I would say somewhere in the middle would probably be the best place to be. But again, it depends on each individual person. So what about fair wages and compensation? So let me read a couple things on that. Deuteronomy 24:14 and 15. So do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is a fellow Israeli or a foreigner residing in one of our towns or your towns. Pay them their wages each day before sunset, because they are poor and are counting on it. Otherwise, they may cry to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. So that's just one passage. Here's another one. Let me just plug it in really quick.
Yeah, so we would have to do a Bible study on something like that, because obviously that verse is referring to some kind of a context in that culture, some kind of abuse, type of abuse that was going on, and you would have to study the passage and the culture around it to clearly understand it. Like, off top of our heads, I don't think we can come up with.
Can you apply that though in a general sense though? I mean, that just the concept of taking advantage of somebody.
Well, I mean, general sense, it's being honest.
Yeah.
It's about being forgiving.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It's about valuing the other people. Like, yeah, you can definitely extract some general concepts.
Yeah, so here's related to that, James 5:4. So chapter 5, verse 4. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. And I know I'm like just going after like a verse, specific verse, and having the whole context helps a lot too. But even in this case, it talks about the fairness, in compensating the workers, not to take advantage of people, right? So like in business, some people, we talked about communism or socialism versus capitalism. Some people who lean more on the socialism side or socialistic side, they will say, well, these capitalists, they're taking advantage of people, right? And who knows, maybe some are, but But as Christians, and if we own businesses, the Bible kind of clearly states that we need to be fair. We should not be taking advantage of people in that sense. Right.
Yeah, I remember I found out about this one person, like this is years ago. I don't think I was married yet. A person in our church was found out to borrow money and not give him back. Like that was his thing, I guess. And he had to do this to enough people where it finally exploded, and everybody, it was a big church, everybody found out, and it kind of became a known thing in the community about that person. And I remember that there is a passage in Psalms, I think, that says that, good godly person borrows money and pays it back. Like it actually states that, right? And it was shocking to me because, like, I thought it was an obvious principle that every person has to follow. That if you borrow money, then you don't.
You should give back.
You don't keep it to yourself. You give it back. And a lot of things we take for granted just because we grew up in a Christian biblical environment, and we cultivated this healthy biblical behaviors. And then we read something like that, like, well, if somebody worked for you and you promised to pay, you have to pay, right? And it's like, well, somebody wouldn't pay, like you would be shocked because we take it for granted. But in reality, like if you don't have biblical worldview taught, you don't have the truth taught, like societies go haywire and they develop very unhealthy patterns and very unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah,
I mean, not that Christians haven't been guilty of developing unhealthy behaviors when they go off topic, right? But like some people need to learn this, like go to the Bible and read, like, hey, if somebody worked for you, you have to pay them their wages. Be fair.
Right. And there's another example in the Bible that talks about a person that had a field that hired some people in the beginning of the day and agreed on some price for them. So they started working, and then like middle of the day, he found some people just not doing much. He's like, okay, go work in my field, I'll pay you, and agreed on the price with them as well. And then towards the end of the day, he found yet some more people and made an agreement with them to work. So they all three groups of people worked in the field. And then at the end, when it came to payments, he gave all three groups of people the same amount. And the ones that started from the beginning of the day, they were like, hey, that's not fair. So what do you guys think of that?
So I mean, I could jump all over this one, but I mean, I mean, that parable is clearly regarding salvation and riches and kingdom in heaven. It's not necessarily talking about the financial reward of the workers in the field. Is talking about whether or not somebody, dedicates their lives and or in the last minutes and the last breaths of their lives that they have made a decision to accept Christ, that they're still going to receive the same reward. So I mean, getting back to the point of being honest and fair to your workers, I think, we can all tie that back to the great commandment as well. Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if we're truly regarding that neighbor, that worker, as ourselves, why would we be shortchanging that neighbor of doing the work that, either we were incapable of doing ourselves or that we didn't have the capacity to do ourselves because we're trying to head towards a greater goal. So we've now hired them to do those things. If we're loving them as ourselves, are we working them too hard? Are we asking them to do things that we would never do? Because in that instance, so we're not really loving them as ourselves, are we? So I think that when we're talking about just treating workers fairly, because that's what it seems like. What you're at, you were getting at here is like, what are your thoughts on should we treat workers fairly? And you could take that out so far, and I'll give you an example. My wife has found this website called Temu, and she loves this website Temu, right? And she loves it because the stuff is cheap. Well, how do you make stuff cheap? How do you get stuff that's cheap?
Cheap quality, cheap product, cheap materials.
How about cheap labor?
And labor.
These poor people that are probably working their fingers to the bone, to make these products. So I sort of have a little bit of a gut check when I think about, all right, this product that you would normally pay, a little bit more for a better quality type of item by somebody who took some time and care and got a fair wage to make this. Now, am I supporting that whole process of a worker getting an unfair wage? I mean, that goes through my mind, and I think, there's even like a Saturday Night Live skit on it, like where they joke about, these workers, and even the phones that we hold in our hands, the iPhones, the Androids, these are all manufactured by folks that are probably not getting a fair wage. So are we now guilty as well of this because we're supporting that? I mean, it's an honest question. So again, you could take that out and you can kind of make that as wide as you want it or as tight as you want it, or kind of put the blinders on and say, I don't want to think about that.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, I'm thinking it more from the business owner perspective.
Well, we have
your business.
So the microphone stand on the microphone that I'm talking is made by a Chinese company. I'm familiar with it, Muki. I'm familiar with that company, right? Mm-hmm. So that was made. This is a business decision that you made to purchase a microphone stand that was made by cheap labor in China. I'm not knocking you, Jerry. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that.
I'm slightly disappointed in you, Jerry.
I guess what I'm saying is that as business owners, we have to make these decisions because we have to buy tools that help us to do our business better. The laptop that you have been controlling this entire interview on was manufactured in China, only because they could never afford to do it here because of what would be considered a fair wage, right? And, I import goods from China. So I took a trip out to go see the farm and see if there's smiles on the faces of the people that are doing this, or if they're, being enslaved by doing this. And, thankfully, I'm happy to say that all of the folks that were there were they maybe they were told that they could disappear in a couple of days if they don't smile. I don't know, but I guess what I'm saying is that you can take that out pretty far if you wanted to. You're talking about actually crossing the name on the check that you're handing to a person. I'm taking it out a little bit further.
Right. Yeah. I'm more thinking what is more under your control. And I understand this is still under your control, but related to people. So like related to wages that you're paying to people who are working for you. Not necessarily like...
I get it. Yeah. But it is under your control though.
You're right. Yes. I mean... Yeah, so then the question is, how far should you take this?
It's a great question, and I think that's a challenge that I have personally when I think about some of these things. I some of the folks that I've worked with that own businesses, they have manufacturing and folks that work for them in Mexico, and one of their questions was, are these folks? I don't. It's a lot cheaper in Mexico than I can do it here in the States, but I want to make sure that those people are still getting a fair wage. Are they still earning a fair wage? Because if so, or if not, I don't want to do it. I'm not interested in doing it. And we're reassured, and these folks are making 10x what the other people in the village would normally make. So I guess you can take a look at from many different aspects, and I'm only bringing it up because I think about these things. I'm not bringing it up because I'm, saying that you're doing anything wrong or whatever. But these are things that I think we have to think about. If we're going to talk about, are we loving our neighbors as ourselves? Or we're just turning a blind eye to the fact that my iPhone was probably made by slave labor, let's be honest, in China, by folks that, probably don't like what they do.
So it brings up a little bit different...
Didn't think I was going to go in that direction, did you?
No, it's good. It's good. I heard this somewhere about caring for people. Like, what is your capacity to care for people? Like, how many people can you care for? Like, you have your family, you have your community, you have your town, city, state, country, continent world, like how many people can you actually care for yourself individually? And I mean, what I heard was like we as humans, we don't have God's capacity to care for so many people. Like we can care for limited number of people, but we just don't have that capacity to care for so many other people. Like right now there's a hurricane, right? Like people are displaced and this and that, and it's like, I mean, we can help some people, but can you help everybody?
So what does it mean to care?
Use the word love. How many people can you love? Like,
Yeah, I've done a lot of talking, so I'll let Roman talk to this, but I do have some thoughts on this.
It's a good question. I mean, Good Samaritan, right? The parable of Good Samaritan. Who is your neighbor, or who is my neighbor, right? That's the question we're asking. So we're talking about it in terms of neighbor, or like in Russian language, it's not neighbor, it's blizhny, which means a person near to you, nearest to you. Right, so it gives a sense of proximity. There are people who are closer to you. There are people who are farther to you, and those that are closer are your, like, you should, because a lot of people will say like, well, I pray or I love all the people in China or in Africa or who knows where, but the person next to them is being neglected, and that's an excuse, right? Like that probably you don't care about anybody. If you're not taking your time to take care of the people next to you in your proximity. Plus that verse that you mentioned in the beginning, that if you do not take care of your family, you're basically have rejected faith and become an unbeliever. We are required to first of all take care of our own people, like that God has given us. Either it's our parents, elderly parents, maybe our siblings, or primarily like if we're married and have our own kids, that's our primary responsibility. That's who we take care of first of all. And then we have people in the further circle. In addition to this, people have different capacities, right? Like in the parable of the talents, some people had one talent that they hid in the ground. Other people had capacity for much, much bigger work. And so it also depends on the capacity, I would think. Like if you're capable of ministering to just one person and that drains you and you're not capable of doing anything else, well, that's your calling. But another person has great administration skills and they have a greater capacity and resilience, and maybe they're called to save half the world and be a president or a king or whatever. Right,
but even in that case, even if they're president or king, their one-on-one interaction or care or love for all the people, they just, humanly, it's, in my view and my understanding, humanly, it's impossible. Like we don't have that capacity to love everybody like that, course. In that sense. So I think what you brought up, the Samaritan, is a good point. Even in business, it's like, that's why what people we directly impact in our business, those are the ones that we should definitely impact in a positive way. And then, like David, you mentioned just like materials that we buy and things like that. I think it's definitely good to think through that. And if we have the opportunity and the ability to buy something somewhere else, maybe we should. But I almost think this may sound really bad, but it's almost like that should be somebody else's concern who is closer to those people there. I guess I'm not trying to push it off, but in some ways I'm thinking that somebody who's closer to the people who are like in slave labor or whatever, there needs to be somebody there that's like making some kind of impact, and maybe it's one of us or whoever that needs to move there or change things or whatever it is. I don't know, whoever, like God puts something on their heart to do that.
Yeah, I don't mean to belabor that point, and I apologize for sort of introducing that to the conversation, not for any other reason other than just to kind of get somebody's juices turning or thinking. But to get back to your question though of how many people can we care for? How many people do we have the capacity to care for? And I find it interesting the way you framed the question of it's more of quantitative as opposed to qualitative, right? So we tend to think in numbers, how many, versus what about the quality of care or attention that we can give to even just one person. And that's sort of like, I think, from a perspective of evangelism, when I hear folks that come to churches and they talk about, well, can't you go to your neighbor? Like, are you telling me you can't go over to your neighbor's house and witness to them and talk to them about Jesus? And my question to them back would be, well, what if your family is saying, yeah, our dad's home all the time, but he's not actually here because I don't really get to hang out with him because he's always working, or whatever the case is. Are you really saying that it's your responsibility to go and talk to your neighbor at that point? Or is your responsibility first to your family to say, I'm supposed to, pour into my family and make sure that I'm, pouring into my family first, then, giving the capacity to go out and maybe qualitatively spend more time with one person that might have the opportunity to affect folks in greater numbers. Ravi Zacharias talks about the time that when he was on his deathbed, because he had just attempted to commit suicide, that there was a man who came to visit him in that hospital and handed him a Gideon's Bible and read to him the verse, because you live, I will also live. And in that moment, he made a decision to impact the world. Of course, Ravi Zacharias' ministry didn't turn out, I guess, positively. However, the amount of people that were impacted by that one person, qualitatively, not necessarily quantitatively, that affected, because he heard a word from the Lord to go and talk to this young man who just died or just tried to commit suicide. So I just think, when we talk about, we have to be careful when we talk about how many versus how well can we impact the life of folks around us. And I think God will, sort of move in that direction if we're called to be the Billy Grahams and, speak in front of audiences of hundreds of thousands, or if we're called to minister to our neighbor or not.
Yeah. No, I agree with you definitely about quantity or quality versus quantity. The reason why I brought up quantity was more to do like with things that we buy, right? Like, so, okay, I got this from some company that's in China and so on. And potentially there was cheap labor involved in that. So,
no, there was.
Okay, so there was. But like, first, I mean, I've heard of things being made by cheap labor, but it never came to my mind like, okay, everything I get, I should consider, was it not?
I'm not saying you should. I'm just asking the question.
But what I'm trying to say is like the quantity portion of it. So like in that sense, if I'm just thinking of my company and how can I impact people around me within the company in a positive way, I'm not thinking about the people where I bought some equipment from. Like, I'm not even thinking about who made that, how did it come to be. It's like, okay, I just needed this piece of equipment. I went to Amazon, bought it, and here it is, and had no thoughts of like who made it, how they made it, whatever it was. And maybe I should think more about it. But what my point was more so like, even if I do think about those people, can I really impact them? Can I really love them? Can I really care for them? And I'm saying, I don't know. I don't think I can. Like, I don't have the capacity to. If I knew exactly who that person was and if I could send them something or do whatever, maybe I could in that way. But in a general way, I don't think I can, is what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Right or wrong, I don't know.
Oh, fair.
But yeah.
Fair.
But I do agree with you about quality versus quantity. Yeah. And the other point I wanted to make was, you mentioned pour into our family before neighbor and so on. I think there's even another step before that. We need to pour into ourselves. Like, if we're not overflowing with whatever we're trying to pour into our family and business and neighbors and so on, if we don't have it, how can we give it to somebody else, right? So in a way, like, we really got to work on ourselves and then pass it on to the family and friends and business and so on. What are your thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, just kind of getting back to the great commandment of to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. I think that if we see and find ourselves treating or mistreating other people, that's a reflection on what we feel about ourselves, right? So if we're loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, that might not necessarily be a good thing because we don't truly love ourselves. I think the way that God, has given His love for us. One of the things for the viewers, we went to a date night. Jerry and his wife Natalie and me and my wife Roman was gallivanting in Milan at the time. But we went to a date night where we had this couple come and talk to us about marriages and talk about, just some of the things that they find in healthy marriages. They're I don't know necessarily call them marriage counselors, but that's their ministry, is to talk about healthy marriages. And one of the things that I found that was interesting is we've always heard, like, look at your spouse the same way that God looks at your spouse. Look at them the same way and treat them the same way that God would be treating your spouse. Are you really loving your spouse the same way that God? However, this couple, they made the distinction, which I thought was important. They said to love your spouse the same way that God loves you. And there's a difference there, I think, because if you're looking at it like, well, how does God love my wife? Okay, but really, think about all of the grace that He's given to me, and then we sort of personalize that in a sense. So to answer, I guess, in response to your question of are we truly loving our neighbors in that regard? Can we do better at that? For sure. I think we could do a better job of that.
Yeah, I mean, the point I was also making was that we need to pour into ourselves, and when we're overflowing with whatever we're trying to impact our family with and our friends and neighbors with, then we'll be able to. But if we're missing, if our cup is not full, how can we really pour into somebody else?
Yeah, it could become a really good source of procrastination too. I'm not ready, or perfectionism, right? I'm not ready.
Yeah.
I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Yeah, something.
Are
to
you
think
ready?
About. I mean, there is also a lot of energy you're receiving from doing what you are supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like once you start doing it, you get or the bicycle analogy, like you can't really steer a bicycle until you're moving, right? So you can't really get energized and have a sense of fulfillment and have a capacity to serve people unless you actually start serving and doing things, right? So it's connected. I think it's not like you have to complete step 1 first and fill yourself up, and then you're going to be able to do. You have to start step A and step B simultaneously, almost, because they're interdependent.
Yeah, it's almost like levels. Like level 1, pour a little bit, or maybe you have a small cup. Okay, you're overfilling your own small cup, and now you can pour into your family from that small cup. But then your cup becomes bigger, and then you got to fill some more. Something. Yeah. I'm taking that analogy to a level that it doesn't work. All right. What about? Let's see. Let's pick another one. How about servant leadership? How does that apply? How is that defined in the Bible? And there's actually a couple verses I can read. And then how does that apply to business?
Why don't you read the verses?
Yeah. Okay. 1 second or 2.
You can edit out
David speaking.
Edit out everything that I've said and just put Roman on. That'd be perfect. I appreciate that.
I'm good.
Okay, so Mark 10:42 through 45. So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So that's one example there.
I'll let the theologian tackle that one.
So what's the question?
The question is, it's a topic like servant leadership.
Uh-huh.
Servant leadership.
You have any specific question? I mean, it's
How does, well, we see this verse as an example in the Bible. How does that translate into business?
I guess let's start with definitions. What is leadership, right? What is leadership? And we're talking about in the context of business.
Well, we can start from that verse, and in that verse, Jesus gave himself as an example, or whoever wrote Mark gave an example of Jesus, Son of Man. He did not come to be served, but Jesus was a leader, right? He was a leader, but he didn't come to be served. He came to serve. So he was a servant leader.
Yeah, so again, definition of leadership, because the word leadership is not necessarily mentioned here. But one of the definitions, or the simplest high-level definitions of leadership that I've heard of is turn around and see if anybody is following you. Mm-hmm. Like if nobody's following you, you're not a leader, right? And if you have people following you, then you're a leader. But how do you make people follow you? And I think that distinguishes servant leadership from transactional leadership, from all other types of leaderships, right? So, how do you make people follow you? By serving them. I'm sure there are different definitions or implication. People imply different things when they say, well, like servant leadership.
We grew up way back under communism. Mm-hmm. How much did we follow our leaders over there? Like people were forced to follow them, right? So people followed the communistic leaders, but it's not because they wanted to.
Yeah, it was very authoritarian.
Yeah,
leadership.
Or like same thing like in Iran and other places right now, mm-hmm. even today, right? Like people are forced to follow. So there's different kinds of leaders out there, but this really talks about servant leaders. So maybe the definition that you mentioned of turning around and seeing if people follow you, that's a good definition for servant leader. Like willfully are they following you, like out of their own accord or out of
and that's what I'm saying. Like people will follow you for many reasons, including authoritarian, like mm-hmm. in communism. Like they will follow you if you threaten them, right? Or if you manipulate their minds with propaganda, they will follow you, and they will love you for the wrong reasons mm-hmm. because they've been manipulated. But we're talking about specifically this passage and the servant leadership. I guess servant leadership means in this context is you serve people, and because you show them this service, this love and care, genuine care about them, out of the goodness of their heart, out of the experience that they had with you, and out of understanding of who you are, they want to follow you. They want to be next to you. They want to do things that you encourage them to do. That would be servant leadership, I guess.
And how does that translate into business?
I mean, leadership and followership are interconnected, right? It's kind of dance between leaders and followers, and different followers require different leaders, leadership styles. Maybe there is no place for this Machiavelli style of leadership, which is based on manipulation and deception. But there's definitely room for some kind of authoritarian leadership. So if there is an emergency, you don't have time to make people love you and care about you. You just need to tell them what to do, and they need to follow you. And so you have to have kind of like a strong hand, because if you start this dialogue with them, like, well, you need to follow me because of this and this, and you spend time communicating and being friendly, things are not going to get done. And if, buildings are falling down or an emergency is happening, you need to have like you need to have cups. Like I remember when 9/11 was happening, I was watching a report that, I mean, obviously this was 20 plus years ago, but back then, being a young man, I was watching TV, and there was a bunch of cops were brought from different mega cities to New York to help out move the traffic. And there was a cop from Chicago who was standing at the street, helping navigate traffic. And he had no idea where the streets are, where people need to go. And somebody would pull up to him and ask him, how do I get here and here? And he's like, go straight, go left. And if they start asking, like, hold on, that's not where that place is located. And he would just start yelling, like, I said, go straight and take a left. Like, there is no room for arguing. Like, do what I say. And because he had this attitude, this authoritarian style, he was actually successful in navigating the traffic and removing all the congestions that were creating problems in the area. Maybe not the best example, but certain situations require authoritarian leadership, right? There is no really room for servant leadership. So it depends who you're dealing with. And then if you're dealing with lazy fools from the book of Proverbs, obviously servant leadership will not always work with that too. You have to have different styles of leadership available. So those are my thoughts. But if you're leading people to Christ, if you're a leader who leads people to Jesus, maybe then there is room for this. But yeah, that verse needs to be looked at closer. What exactly that passage is trying to communicate, to understand how we can apply it to business environment.
What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're so in this instance, you're trying, I think, to connect the dots of somebody who is willing to serve, and how well does that, I guess, play out for that person in a leadership position if they're looking to serve those subordinates, I guess, for lack of a better term, versus to rule over them. And I think that the heavy hand, the iron hand, you might get them to do what you're asking them to do for a little while, but then over time, you might lose your crowd there, I guess, to a certain degree. But to kind of relate it a little bit to business, it's not directly correlated, but to relate it a little bit to business, Jim Collins in his book Good to Great talks about two different leadership styles, and he talks about the window and the mirror theory. And the good leader, when something goes wrong, will look out the window, meaning he'll look and give praise to the people on his team. And he'll say, it's because of them that we were able to succeed. He won't look in the mirror. He'll look out the window. Conversely, if something goes wrong, the good leader will look in the mirror and looking at himself as opposed to looking out the window. Versus a poor leader, when something goes wrong, they're going to look out the window and blame the team and not look in the mirror. So again, loosely correlated to sort of a servant leadership in business, analogy or description. But I think that I've seen a lot of different leadership styles through business and through work, and I've seen folks that are very, very good leaders, and some that are very poor leaders. But I've also seen, like you said, people that will follow poor leaders because they don't have a choice. There are certain instances or they feel like they don't have a choice. Folks that might have a particular job and think that that's their only way to make a living. They don't have a choice but to leave this job. If they do, where am I going to go? But I have to follow, my boss, who doesn't necessarily do a good job of leading us. But where am I going to go? So they have no choice but to follow that leader. Are they as effective as the person who, if that leadership were willing, or that leader were willing to come off the mountain, I guess, hold the hand and say, look, I'm willing to dig the ditches with you? I think you'll get a lot more out of those folks. So,
yeah, but I think it's important to not only consider leadership but also followership, because you have variety of different followers with different capacities, different gifts, different mindsets, different shortcomings, right? And they require attention or different.
So, is it the responsibility of the leader to choose the appropriate follower, or is it the responsibility of the leader to groom that follower into a more effective and more productive follower.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it's the leader's
I think
responsibility
so too. Yeah.
to adapt, to understand, find different ways to encourage or to motivate and so on. Yeah, but followership is very underrated topic that needs to be actually looked into it, because we're ultimately followers of Christ, right? Like we need to see how are we doing as followers. Like if you, I remember, so I had the leadership program back when I was studying for my degree, and I remember professor telling us like, hey, Google the word leadership. So we Googled the word leadership, and so it gives you, I don't remember, like millions, whatever, results, right? And then he says, now Google the word followership, and it's like hundreds, I think. Like people don't really think about it or look into it, but for leaders to understand what they're doing, they need to understand their followers, who they're dealing with. And ultimately, to be a good leader, you need to be a good follower.
So a thing that comes to mind talking about this is the book Straight Line Leadership, or Straight Line Leader. Maybe Leadership. Yeah. And in there, the author talks about inner stance. And inner stance to me is just a mindset. Like, what is your mindset about variety of things? And this can be one of those things. Like in our mind, what is our inner stance in terms of what a leader is? Servant leader or leader, like what's a good leader? What does a good leader look like? And a lot of times, when we think of leaders, we look at a pyramid, and it's like whoever's at the top of the company, well, that's the leader. Like having a pyramid, and the person, CEO or whoever, that's the leader, and then underneath you have the C-suite, and then you have your VPs, and depending on the size of the company and all that. And then at the very bottom you have your frontline people who actually do the day-to-day work or whatever. I mean, everybody does stuff, but there was a concept of the reverse pyramid that was presented to me actually by the Pastor Bob from Rochester, from Rochester Assembly, Calvary Assembly, one of the two. And he presents it as an upside down pyramid. So like the pastor or the CEO would be at the very bottom of the inverted pyramid, and that pastor or CEO serves the C-suite, and the C-suite serves the VPs and directors, and kind of, and everything goes up. So the service happens from the bottom up, but on the bottom, it's not the frontline people. It's the CEO. It's whoever's ultimately in charge of the whole company. So that could be our inner stance or our mindset. It's like, who's the leader? Is the leader on the top, on the very top, or is the leader on the very bottom? Just something that came to mind. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, comments on that?
I mean, I don't think I fully understand, because it doesn't really matter where you place the person, on top or on the bottom, visually, right? The results are the same. It's somebody who influences the direction, chooses the direction, influences people to go in that direction. Just how you do it is different.
Right,
So,
but visually you see, like, okay, we're so used to seeing whoever's in charge at the top, but then all of a sudden you see whoever's in charge is actually on the bottom. So it's like, why are they on the bottom?
I mean, leadership by definition is person who leads others, right? And people are following him. So whether you place that person in the beginning of the crowd or in the back of the crowd or in the middle of the crowd, different styles, he's still leading the crowd, and they're the followers, and he's the leader.
Yeah.
Even if he's not recognized as a leader and people don't know and call him the leader, he's the leader. There's this really good movie called one of the greatest movies ever made, called 12 Angry Men. It's a black and white movie. I watched it several times. Definitely recommend watching it. Very interesting. So it's 12 people on jury who are deciding the fate of this young boy who allegedly killed his father with a knife. And everybody was like, oh man, I gotta. So they had like a formal person assigned who was in charge, formal leader, right? And he's like, okay, guys, like everybody's in a hurry, everybody needs to be somewhere. Let's get this done. And everyone's like, he's guilty, he's guilty. Like nobody wants to think about it. And it's like 11 men voted guilty, and one person said, well, I need to think a little bit more about this. And there was so much pressure on him. And he just started asking questions. Like he wasn't this big figure. He wasn't like imposing, not a typical leadership figure. He was just asking questions. And that was his way of leading this crowd into thinking more and discussing more. And he changed the opinion of the entire group, even though they had a formal leader assigned, even though they had this bright figure, other individuals who seemed to be influential. But at the end, I mean, it doesn't matter how you switch things around. He's the leader. People followed him, right? Different style of leadership, but still, you put the person on top of the pyramid, middle of the pyramid, bottom of the pyramid. Leader is a leader. Followers are the followers.
Yeah, no, I agree from your perspective from that. My point was more so for us individually. Like typically when we think of a leader, we think of somebody who's in charge and that, okay, you have followers that follow that leader, but you don't think of that leader serving the next line, whoever's below them. You just think of that leader leading them, but not serving them. But if you have an inverted pyramid, so inverted pyramid would, I mean, just so we're on the same page, it would look like this versus like that, right? So when you have that inverted pyramid, visually, you're like, well, why is that person on the bottom? He's the leader, but why is he on the bottom? I'm so used to seeing them on top. Well, they're on the bottom because they're serving that next row up, and then that row serves the row above it, and so on.
I guess, I mean, maybe it makes sense. Doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
Sorry.
We'll have to spend more time on explaining it, but later on. David, what do you think?
I mean, I think I understand the concept of why they're, I mean, like you were talking earlier about the contrast, they're trying to contrast, I think to a certain degree what people are used to seeing in a sense, getting you to think of leadership in a different way. But I also understand your point, whether you put them at the top or at the bottom, their leadership style, if they are, I guess seeing themselves as the person who is, my job is to get you to, get you whatever you need to get your job done. That's my job. And that's sort of the way that on my team, how it works is when I have calls with them, I say, you know what you have to get done. What can I do to help you get everything that you need to get done? So that's sort of, I guess looking at it that way. But either way, if something doesn't go right, it's going to come to either the person on the bottom or the top. Doesn't matter, if right. It's going to all fall on their shoulders, to a certain degree. But that's all I have to say about that, I guess.
Yeah.
I didn't watch 12 Angry Men.
You did?
I didn't.
I definitely. Let's watch it together. It's a really, really good movie.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
I'll watch it more times if needed.
Let's do it. Next Friday.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah.
Don't we need headphones like in a podcast? Aren't you supposed to be wearing headphones? Isn't that the way it's supposed to go down?
So it would help, like Roman is far away from the microphone. It would help to know that.
Oh, I see. He could see exactly.
Yeah.
I see. Gotcha.
It's all about perception. Like if we put headphones on, it's gonna be more of a professional.
You'll be more cool.
Setup.
Yeah.
But then we'd have to buy more Chinese products, I think, in order to do that. So.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. We'll have to invest in.
Are we wrapping up?
Yeah, we are.
I have like a couple of things came up into my mind that I want to leave this.
Yeah. So go.
Guys with.
Free form over here.
So one is you were talking about leadership, and you mentioned something, and it triggered a memory. Another, I guess, page that I read in John Maxwell's book, like 15, 20 years ago. I don't know, a while ago, where he said that he recommended for leadership. He basically said that if your team does something really poorly, like they fail, you as a leader have to say, I did it. If everything goes according to the plan, you as a leader say, like, we did it. But if everything, everything goes exceptionally well, then you say, you did it, your team did it. So I remember that, like, that was really good stuff. Like I equipped myself with that thought or that principle. I don't know how successful I was in using it, but definitely looks good on paper.
Yeah.
And the second, about the motivation, I remembered watching Ray Comfort. You were talking about evangelism, and I remembered Ray Comfort giving some teaching on how to do
The
evangelism.
Banana Man.
Yeah. And apple. Banana and apple. And I remember in one of episodes that I watched, he said that he was talking about motivation. He said, we're not motivated to go preach the gospel. Like, you tell people, your neighbors are going to hell, and nobody gets up off their couches and goes and preaches to them like they're actually dying or burning in hell. He says, but guess what? If I offer you $1,000 for every time you go and share the gospel with somebody, you're going to be running around in the dark with flashlights trying to find people, drunkards and whoever, so you can share the gospel with them, so you can have the $1,000. I don't remember where he was exactly going with all of this, but I remember that this really made the impact on my memory and my thought processes. It's like, yeah, that's true. Like, we're not motivated to do these things for Christ's sake or for salvation's sake, but we would be very motivated if money was in play. Right? That's motivation for you.
I mean, we could change the direction of this whole conversation and talk about evangelism. And I think I'd be a little more equipped to have that conversation. But yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, brings it back full circle about motivation, right?
Yeah.
So what's the source of motivation? Well, guys, thanks again.
Hey, what is your motivation for these podcasts?
So I've been asked that a few times, and I think I answered it on some of the podcasts. You'll have to listen to those.
All right.
No, I'm kidding.
I do. You're right. I do have to listen to them.
Start right after this.
Yeah. My motivation, I think it's like three things. One is networking. So bringing guests on is a form of networking with them. So that's one. Two is to become better at communicating and asking questions, listening, talking, communicating. So that's two. And what's my third one? And three is like people who listen. I mean, they can learn something from guests. So like sharing the knowledge with the world as well. And then there's probably some selfish ones beyond the three.
Well, what are those? Those are the ones I want to talk about. That's when we get to the good stuff.
Getting better at communicating is very selfish.
Yeah, it is. It is. So one of the selfish
You want
ones.
to be a YouTube star?
I want to, in some ways, put myself out there and attract people who want to be around me.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's good.
So
By the way, what's the name of your podcast?
right now it's just like JS podcast, my first and last initials. So someday we'll
Getting back to the whole ministry thing, right? Putting the name in front of the
putting me on the
ministry.
spot.
Well, I guess this is not a ministry, so you're safe.
It is
a
to
what?
a certain degree a ministry, I would imagine.
I mean, everything you do is a ministry in a way. Like your job is a ministry, so you better do it well. You should be working as unto the Lord. So
Yeah, I guess I'm going off topic, but there's this kids movie Incredibles, the cartoon, right? And there's this character, the evil character. You both seen it, right?
yeah,
Incredibles.
I've seen it.
And there's superheroes, right? And then there's this villain who is not doesn't have superpowers, but he created technology to be super. And his goal in life was like to create technology to make every human being super. And he has this quote that I love. He says, "And when everybody is super, nobody is." Right?
Because everybody's the same.
Yeah. So if everything is ministry, then nothing is. That's where I was going with it.
Oh,
I would disagree with that, but I get the point.
yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I think abilities and super abilities are different from ministry. I think the example.
But you get where I was going.
I got what you're saying,
Definitions.
but I don't think it relates. But anyway, definitely I like talking to you guys, even on camera. So thanks for coming by and having a good chat.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
What are we going to talk about next time?
Don't know yet, but I mean, I had a list of like a zillion things here. We went through like just like a few, but we'll pick a different topic. I don't know. What do you want to talk about next?
What do I want to talk about? I was just kidding. I don't have anything that I'm in particular that there are, I think, things that I could talk to more intelligently than the topic tonight. But
I like to mix business and life together. And Roman heard this already multiple times. Integrated life. Like, to me, life is one. It's not home life, work life, church life, or whatever. It's all one life.
is that something that you're working towards, or is that something that you feel like you've accomplished, or that you do on a regular basis?
I'm working towards.
I got you. Okay,
Definitely.
I got you.
It's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. I was gonna say, because if you get the answer to that, I'd like to know.
No. I'm working towards. Definitely.
Cool.
All right. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you.